I feel like we've settled now, Brie, so a good time to
Okay.
get started. So welcome to everyone that is joining us today. It's really, really nice to see you here with us this evening. My name is Megha Krishnakumar, for anyone that doesn't know me, and I am the undergraduate student advisor in the Department of Law here at LSE. Our event today is in line with the fact that February is LGBT History Month, and to celebrate, the LSE Department of Law is hosting this conversation with Brie Stevens-Hoare QC, who we are really, really lucky to be joined by this evening. She is, excitingly, an LSE alumna. And
a bit of it. Are you calling me history now?
No, well, I know, maybe an unfair association in that sentence, but
that's fine. That's fine.
Valued history. But Brie is also a property barrister at Hardwicke Chambers. Just to kind of tell you a few more fantastic bits of information about Brie, she's been recommended as a leading silk in the latest edition of the Legal 500 and Chambers UK. She recently won Barrister of the Year at the Modern Law Awards and Chamber UK's Real Estate Silk of the Year Award. More importantly, perhaps for our discussion today, and excitingly, on top of her professional accolades, Brie is a founding member of FreeBar, a network of LGBT people and allies who work at and with the bar, and is a regular judge for the LSE Department of Law's annual Featherstone Moot, a competition which is dedicated to the consideration of areas of sexual orientation and gender identity law. So welcome, Brie. Thank you so much for joining us today after a busy day.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me along.
It's a pleasure. So just to kind of begin with, Brie, I guess just covering some of the perhaps really positive ways in which we've seen progress in the last 20 years, let's say, since the year 2000, kind of in the UK. So just to kind of highlight a few of those things that we've seen perhaps in the law and in terms of working in the law. Section 28, which was prohibited the promotion of homosexuality by local councils, was stopped in 2003 or 2000 in Scotland. We had the Equality Act of 2010, which gave kind of LGBT plus employees protection in the workplace.
Indeed.
Yeah, in 2004, we had civil partnerships which extended relationship rights, and then followed up in 2013 by gay marriage becoming legal here in the UK. So those are a few of the big changes that we see in the law here in the UK.
For me personally, the civil partnership was the one.
Really?
Yeah. If you don't mind me with it, just a personal story. So when that came in, bizarrely, I was away on holiday with my partner. And we talked about getting civilized, as we call it. But I woke up the morning that it became law.
Wow.
And I don't know why, but when I woke up, it came into my head straight away. And I literally cried with joy. And I sort of, I'm a lawyer and I'm pansexual and been in lesbian relationships for quite a while. It always sounds, when I say that, like there's been lots of them. Serial monogamous. But it just really hit me how important it was that my state, my country, recognized the most important relationship in my life as being valid. It gave it that status. And I would not, if you'd have said to me the day before, I knew it was really important, but there was something really visceral about waking up and thinking, from today on, there is no question that's how the state views my most important connection.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. And actually, it's a lovely way of you putting that into words. You're right. I think the word recognition there is so important, isn't it? I think something that perhaps those who are heterosexual have always taken for granted, and perhaps those who aren't have taken for granted perhaps wouldn't happen in their lifetime, like you say, in the country that they are from and they live in. I can imagine that was a hugely impactful and just touching moment for you and your partner as well. Did you?
She didn't wonder. She couldn't understand what I was going on about. No, that's not true.
The emotion.
That's not true.
And I wonder for you as well, do you think, Brie, at that time, with your involvement in the law and obviously being a barrister, do you think that that also had that added element of the importance of seeing that in law?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think as a lawyer, you understand the significance of the law as a framework for our society. Yeah, I mean, you reference change, and I would see the sort of progression in LGBT rights, and the work is not finished by any stretch, and internationally even more so. But I would see that progression as being something that sometimes legislation and the law, or challenges to the law through litigation, drives forward. Other times it's social, it's the public view. So for me, the civil partnership was very much something that was driven through campaigning around legislation, around Parliament, around progression towards equality, and building up. But actually, what then happened from civil partnership to same-sex marriage, in my view, was a flip over, and it became about the public opinion and the social view. And because when civil partnership came in, largely, in my view, because of the attitude of the church, and Church of England particularly, but other religious groups, there was this need to have not marriage, civil partnership. And then at that point when it came in, it felt like same-sex marriage was a long, long way off. But my theory is then a huge proportion of the population went to gay weddings, civil partnerships, because we had a lot catching up to do. And suddenly it was like, well, what's the problem? What's the difference? And the public opinion really shifted, and that shift on to same-sex marriage, brought in by a Conservative government, was because the public was like, why haven't we?
And I think it's so interesting you say that. I've never thought about it in that sense. I think when we think historically as well, over so many movements and changes that have happened, positive changes in history, you're right, often, even things that are done in law, it's only really fully accepted when society changes.
You need both, and sometimes one leads and sometimes, and you mentioned section 28, clause 28. For me, that actually was the gift that, giving my politics away, Maggie Thatcher gave us, because that energized the LGBT community and its allies. And really, you see the standing up and fighting and battling on a legal front, really, really being energized from that point on. That was such a backward step. That people then fought and pushed back beyond that step, and on and on.
It's I think you're so right. It's a really interesting example of, in fact, how a hugely restrictive and detrimental law in itself provides the ammunition for progress, in certain ways. But thank you for sharing that with us.
Sorry, I took you off track.
No, not at all. I think it's absolutely what we're here for. It's lovely to hear and lovely to listen. And in this, which is a month of celebration and, all year round celebration of LGBT plus stories, I think it's a lovely one to hear as well from your perspective. And I guess kind of talking a bit about yourself, and you've talked a little bit about your past. Can you tell us a little bit more for our students that are listening and are very much the start of their kind of law careers? Can you tell us a bit about your work and your background?
What do you want? The legal, the personal, the...
I mean, I think whatever you deem most relevant and most interesting for us.
I mean, the legal. So I did want to be a vet.
Okay.
I had a personality clash with my biology teacher, so I realised I wasn't going to do biology O-level. There was only one biology teacher in the school. So I then decided I wanted to be a barrister. I was 13 when I decided that. Lots of ideas about truth and justice and that stuff, and it's what I'd seen on the telly.
Yeah.
I mean, really just my good fortune that for no rational reason I had landed on the thing that was absolutely perfect for me. Yeah. So I decided 13 I wanted to be a barrister, not a solicitor, not any other sort of lawyer, a barrister. Okay. Crime was what I had in mind. School, they kept telling me, you're not good enough, you won't manage to do it. It was at the local grammar school, state grammar school. They told my parents to discourage me. Wow. That I was trying to fly too high and would burn my wings, I think was the expression. But you know, I carried on. I got into the LSE. I came to study law because I wanted to be a barrister, not because I wanted to study law. But actually, I really, really enjoyed studying it, apart from trusts and property. So I still thought I'd be a criminal barrister. Okay. And I can remember being told in our first week of our first year that it was Michael Zander, who was then the head of the first year, telling us the bar won't be there in 5 to 10 years. This was in 1982. So I don't want any of my students applying to go to the bar. So that sort of put the tin lid on it for me, that I was going to apply for the bar, and I wasn't even going to put in an application to get a place at law school. So I went through my degree, did bar school, fine. Went first of all, I did pupillage in a set that did crime, family, and civil. Inevitably, in the 80s, as a woman, was forced to do lots of family work. Okay. Which I really was very clear I didn't want to do. I didn't get taken on there. I went after 12 months and did a third 6 months, which is sort of the on-job training, in a purely criminal set, and then finally realised that crime was not for me.
What do you think made you realise
that? There was, I mean, particularly in those days, there was much less paperwork. Okay. Yeah. So the majority of the folk, absolutely loved being in court. And I should say this as someone who read at the drop of a hat, had only done public speaking when politically it was something I was really passionate about doing. Just sort of thought, when I have to do it, I'll do it. So it wasn't easy for me, but I did love it. But I sort of realized that most of crime, until you get a lot of experience and start getting into the really interesting work, was very fact-finding orientated. Yeah. And that actually I would miss the more academic side. Okay. And the more sort of intellectual jigsaw puzzles of pleadings, which are the things that you prepare to sort of frame your case in the context of litigation. So yeah, and for crime, there's a lot of, you go to court for a case and someone's not produced from custody, or witnesses don't turn up, and you go away and you wait around till 4 o'clock when you're given your papers for the next day. I wanted to have work to do all day. Yeah. So I realized it wasn't for me. And then I thought, what did I really enjoy? I knew I wanted to do civil, definitely not family. And I realized that bizarrely, property was the thing I'd really loved, because it's not just about money, it's people's homes and their businesses and their heritage, and you can put your welly boots on and walk around it. Yeah. But it also, being the academic institution that I'm talking to, I woke up to the fact that it was an area where there were lots of different types of law that come together. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's contract, there's the pure property principles, there's equity, trying to make everything fair, then you have a statutory overlay quite often. And if I can say, culturally, those different types of law are very different, and I love the sort of mess that's created where they clash, particularly where there's a statutory overlay, because they never take account of everything. So yeah, I love it. So I decided that's what I wanted to do and set about building a reputation.
Gosh, that's amazing. And it's interesting you say that, Brie, because I've been talking to all of our first years, and they've just started this term, property, for the first time.
I hated it.
Yeah.
I love it now.
And it's interesting. I think for a lot of them, I think what has been, it's quite philosophical. I think more philosophical than a lot of them expected. And I think for some really enjoy that, some perhaps less so. But I think it's certainly gone above and beyond what many of them expected when you just hear property law, in terms of what you count as property.
I think also, and I've only really twigged this very recently, having a lot of conversations in my areas of practice, which are the more lucrative areas of practice, about why there are not barristers of colour, particularly black barristers in the numbers. And one black barrister was making the comment to me that, well, on the basis that a lot of the law was created and generated around the property interests of the aristocracy.
Yes, yeah.
And how to preserve it within families. That there is a piece about, are you attracted to that? And I think studying it, I wasn't. Okay. In real life, because everybody lives in something. So whether it's as a tenant or a leaseholder, or you own the property, or you're working in a business that owns a property, and what's happening with it impacts you. In fact, it impacts everyone, but it doesn't feel like it when you're studying it.
Okay, that's really interesting. I think will be nice for our students to hear who are listening in. And I guess kind of to change sort of the subject a little bit in terms of your experience of working, and just to encourage, before I ask you this, Brie, if any of our attendees tonight do have any questions, please do put your questions in the question and answer box, and I will pitch those to Brie, and so she can give you her answers. But one of the questions that kind of we were thinking of with regards to your work over these years, have you ever had any anxieties yourself about being out in the workplace throughout your period of working? And I guess interlinked with that, do you think that workplaces in the legal profession do enough to support LGBT plus people sort of in the workplace?
Not enough. The solicitor's profession, or certainly the London, other cities, large firms are significantly ahead of the bar on the solicitor side of the profession. Smaller firms, probably not. The bar is getting there, but in a sense, having been a founder member of FreeBar, which is all about driving best practice, improving culture, to make it a visibly LGBT friendly environment. So yeah, there's more to do. It's actually, there's a lot of gay men at the bar.
Okay.
People often say to me, where are the lesbians, Brie? And yeah, so there are a lot of good stories, but you wouldn't know it.
Okay.
There are a lot of people who are getting on with their business at the bar and haven't had problems, but it's not apparent as a profession that it is open and inclusive. It looks like, I could say some very inappropriate things. It looks like it, which it still is, predominantly, public private school, white male, etc., etc. A hell of a lot better than it was when I joined the profession in the mid to late 80s. There is a long way to go still around trans, and if you look at society, the generational divide in understanding and perception around gender identity, non-binary, etc., etc. It's a huge gap, and the bar is running behind the times. But there is an increasing move and push, and part of FreeBar's work is about being visible, about challenging people to start thinking about their language, challenging them when most organizations would say, we're absolutely LGBT friendly, or at least LGB friendly. We're working on the T as well. That we're saying to them, it was not enough to know you are internally. You've got to signal that. That's got to be clear. Because otherwise people will think, no, this is a scary place.
So do you think, because in what you're saying, when, of course you said, so that you think there's a lot more work to be done in the legal profession. From what you're saying, do you think it's more an issue of communication and, kind of that outwards, how they show that they are, or like they are LGBT plus friendly, or, how they communicate that outwardly? Or do you think it's a matter of, in practice, they're having to be more?
I think for the vast majority of the bar, so far as the L and the G is concerned, it's about understanding the need to communicate, understanding the need to create an environment where people know it's fine. Okay. I think around particularly the T, and the rest of what you might call queer, LGBT plus, etc. There is learning and understanding beyond just the
communication or the
yeah.
Okay. Certainly. And I think, like you say, I think that's probably quite reflective of society and current society, isn't it? And where we.
But I expect more of my profession. I expect my profession, which is about, the administration of justice, about equality before the law, about standing up for those who need a voice to stand up for them. I expect my profession to be ahead of the game, not in line with or behind.
Yeah, very true. And I suppose that's, I guess, the expectations we have of the law, isn't it, is to lead the way. And so I suppose for you, would you say it's quite disappointing in some senses that you've not seen that push from within the profession? And I suppose kind of you talked about it and thinking about, I know that within sort of the law profession, there are a number of different, so FreeBar we'll talk about, because I know you were a kind of founding member of FreeBar. And I know there's also the Barristers, Lesbian and Gay Groups, Lesbian and Gay Lawyers Association as well, and a number of kind of groups that are there within the profession. But I guess to focus in on FreeBar, can you tell us more about it? How did it come about, and what are its objectives?
So I will mention BLAG. BLAG has been around a lot longer. BLAG is a fabulous network, and it operates as a network of individuals getting to know each other, supporting each other, being a safe space for each other. And we work very much with them in the sense that we promote their events, they promote ours. So that's barristers and students who want to be barristers, finding a safe space and a network of people that they know are LGBT. Great. FreeBar was formed by initially 3 chambers that were Stonewall diversity champions. Stonewall saying, as they say to their champions, other organisations, have you got an internal network? Which is how a lot of the work is done. And we're sort of like, the bar doesn't really quite work like that. We're not really that sort of size of organisation. And they said to us, which is unusual at the bar, well, what about you collaborating? So we came together and said, right, we'll do just that. So it's a very loose association. Anyone who wants to, who is part of the bar community, and we've been very clear from the outset, it's not just the barristers, it's anyone who's working at and with the bar. So people working in the inns, in the circuits, members of staff working in chambers, anyone in the bar community, as we call it. And it's about sharing best practice, driving best practice, driving the culture. So, we've got a visibility project going on where our aim is ultimately to have 100 LGBT plus and allies people in the bar community visible, telling bits of their stories. We've launched a FreeBar charter, which is an invitation to bar community organisations to sign up to make progress against, I think there's 9 or 10 particular aims. They can set their time frame. They have to make progress in a year and then tell us what they've done. But it's very light touch. Here's a framework, gives you some targets. You define for yourself how and at what speed you do that, but trying to drive forward. So it's cultural shift.
Okay, and I think that sounds absolutely fantastic, and I'm sure for a lot of LGBT plus members of the bar, and like you say, within whichever position they are associated with the bar, I think, like you say, something about that visibility and something about that allyship and that support, I think, is so important in whatever profession you're in. And they always say to, you have to see yourself or aspects of yourself or important parts of yourself represented, to, I suppose, for those areas to become more attractive and for there to be better representation, sort of the further up you go. So I guess when you were saying that you kind of feel perhaps a bit disappointed about where the law profession is in terms of
I just expect more. I just, we can do better than this.
And would you say that kind of FreeBar in your eyes is helping to
drive that?
Helping it to do that. Yeah. And I think that can only be a wonderful thing. When did you help to found it?
So we've been going, I think, just over 3 years.
Okay. And I guess now that you have founded it and the organisation is there, do you sometimes, I'm sure you founded it because you knew there was a need, but have you been surprised at all from its founding in terms of seeing the need that there has been, or seeing the people?
I think it was much as I expected.
Okay.
I was aware that there were LGBT barristers out there who were not out in their chambers. That people applying for pupils, I know from all the Stonewall research, lots of people who are out at university, then across all sectors, go back in the closet at work when they can't go to work. So sort of aware of those issues, and actually that we need to do that differently and find other ways to do it. So no, there've been some little stories that have come out and you think, that's it. So one of our early events, there's a senior clerk who is a gay man who is very actively involved, and at an event he saw a young barrister and they sort of got speaking, and he said, I recognise you, didn't you apply for pupillage? And he said, yeah. He said, oh, and I think you were actually our first choice that year, why didn't you come to us? And he said, well, ironically, now that I see you here, I thought you weren't a gay-friendly place.
Gosh, wow.
And little did he know he had one of the few senior clerks. And it really hammered home that you need to let people know.
Yeah, and I think it comes back exactly to what you were saying before, isn't it? About how organizations, how it is communicated and how public, and and that is the way in which you are going to attract a more diverse and varied.
And don't get me wrong, it's not all good stories. There are individuals out there. People will have seen the stuff in the press around racism and around sexual assault. There are a lot of trans exclusionary feminist voices, some coming from the bar. I happen to think there's an awful lot more of us that are absolutely inclusionary. We perhaps don't get promoted so much in the press because that's not the narrative. But so it's not all good. But by and large, the majority, actually, you don't have to scratch too far to find the good stuff.
Yeah, and I think it comes back to, there was I think it was Chambers student recently came out with a report that said that there is a greater degree in hiring now, in diverse hiring, and actually they would expect in years to come that hopefully that should impact then, the numbers of in terms of diverse kind of bosses and people at the top of their profession that we see, and especially particularly in obviously the law profession and kind of at the bar. And I think it comes back to what you're saying, that actually that does need to be, however, like that counts on people being willing, like you say, to, when they come out of closet, stay out of the closet, so to speak, when they go into their...
I mean, there's no research for this. Anecdotally, my suspicion is, and that, I mean, we know from the research that women have been coming into the profession in equal numbers, usually slightly more than the men, for over 20 years, probably about 25 years plus now. And yet that's not translating equally into seniority. The attrition rate for our female talent is much greater than male talent. We do lose male talent, but it's much greater. And we're seeing the same in terms of barristers of colour. That there's not for the same period, but there have been increasing improvement in entry level. The one that's really down is black as opposed to other people of colour. And we're not seeing the progression. I suspect, and no one's done the research, there's all sorts of reasons for that, but I suspect from an LGBT point of view, or certainly an LGB, that actually the progression is probably as good in that community as it is across the bar as a whole. I mean, we've just had a Master of the Rolls who was gay retire. Now, in the early stages of his career, it was a big barrier to him. But once everyone woke up to the reality, he progressed fast, as he should have done given his skills. We have a trans master sitting in QB, openly trans. So I suspect that once in, actually there isn't. I mean, there's the internal, am I out? Do I edit with clients? That's a different thing. And people do wrestle with that.
Yeah, certainly. And I think, I suppose it comes back to, and I guess the question I was going to ask you, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you don't necessarily always want those important aspects of yourself to dictate, or be perhaps the thing that defines you in every given situation. And I guess you would love to have that choice of whether it does or it doesn't. But
yeah, I mean, I always say when I'm talking about being visible and being out, that's because I'm not an essentially private person. So for me to not be out, it is containing and constraining myself, and it is a block, a barrier between me and someone I'm communicating with and trying to build a professional relationship of trust and confidence. But for me, the professional involves part of the personal. There are other people who are very private people, and they don't want to bring who they are to their professional life, and I fight for their right to do that. Absolutely. If that's who you are, I wouldn't force anyone to be visible about any part of who they are. But there are people who think it's inappropriate how real and me, someone like I am, with my clients. I think that makes them more comfortable in what for most of them is a difficult situation.
Yeah. And I think, like you say, I think it's interesting because I feel like perhaps for you, that if that were a bit of, if you weren't to be open with that, then for you it would be a hindrance to your
performance,
your performance and your professional kind of demeanor, I suppose. Whereas, yeah, you're right. I guess the right for other people to not have to do that is important as well. And I suppose you were talking about, I suppose, minorities and representation within at the bar and within the legal professions. Do you feel that you kind of contribute to this wider discussion on intersectionality within the legal profession? Obviously you're a woman and a gay woman and, or pattern woman and within kind of legal profession. Do you think that's an important discussion to be had?
Absolutely. absolutely. I mean, I think the time it hit me most was when a Black female member of Chambers said to me, "You do realise you're why I now no longer straighten my hair for work."
Wow.
And I said, "Pardon?" She said, "You dare to be you made me feel like I dare to be me." And that, I think, was the point, and it gave me shivers at the time. And that was the point at which I really understood the power of allyship, and allyship across difference, across different versions of being other. That whilst I know I don't know and understand the lived experience of everyone who is other for reasons that aren't mine. And no one group is a homogenous group anyway. But I understand some of the mechanisms, from being a woman at the bar where it's a visible other, and being gay where it's an invisible, and those work in different ways. Then I understand some of the mechanisms. I understand some of the impacts it can have on the individual. And I understand that I don't understand.
Yeah. But I think that's so important, I think, isn't it?
Yeah. And so I realize that, and I feel a tremendous responsibility as someone who's senior and spent a lot of time building my career, and thinking that me being just in this world would make the difference. That realize, actually, no, I've got to be loud and shout and push and shove and challenge and question and support and pull up, and clear the way and amplify. There's lots more active stuff to do. So I try very hard to do more of that these days.
So I guess linked to that, do you see yourself as a role model? Would you ever kind of reflect upon yourself and think, I am a role model?
Yes, I am. Someone said to me, I think about 12 years ago, Brie, you have no choice about being a role model. Your only choice is about what sort of role model you are. I mean, that's a reality. All of us will, somewhere, some context, be a role model for someone. And you might know that you are. You might not know that you are. And when I unpack, I'm very involved at the moment in the Bar Council's leadership program. And part of what I did in delivering that program was talk about my role models and what I had taken from a number of different people that informs how I work and what I value and how I operate. And some of those are people who've been very close and intimately involved in my life, and others are people that I just have observed. And I take one thing, and they might not be, none of them are perfect people. All of them will have things that I wouldn't take from them. So I mean, what is role model? For me, that's what a role model is. Someone that you see a way they're doing a thing or a value they're living by, and you think, I like that. I'm drawn to that. That feels right to me. That's a thing to aspire to. I'm going to adopt that. But it's not about the whole person.
Yeah, I think that's such a good way of looking at it, because I think more often than not, those who others term as role models sometimes shy away from that, and I'm not a role model. But actually, I think there's something probably quite empowering in realizing that, okay, there are aspects and bits of me which certainly will be role models to others. And I think, like,
it's the difference between role models and heroes.
Yeah.
I'm no one's hero.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, very much so. And yeah, I think that's so important. And I guess one of the questions that we had in sort of when we went out and some students sent in questions, what advice would you give to LGBT plus students and young people working in the law?
I think know yourself. So if you are someone who does want to bring, I'm not going to say your whole self to work, because be fabulous, but you don't necessarily have to smack everyone in the face with the full power of your fabulousness. You've got to be professional, but be true to yourself, I would say. If true to yourself is a private person, great. If true to yourself is more than that, be that. Approach places looking and using your emotional intelligence. And I happen to think most people in the LGBT community, because of the context, the society we live in, and the judgments we have to make about what's safe and what's not safe, and the clues we look for how people are reacting, are well equipped in terms of emotional intelligence to do that. When you go into a workplace, find your allies, find the people that either are, on our bus or will support you, and use them, get their intelligence about an organization. But mostly be you, be true to you. And for goodness sake, when you're applying for pupillage, training contracts, whatever, do not leave your personality at the door, either in writing or in person or on Zoom. So many do. They adopt what they think a chambers or a law firm is looking for. And you could be wrong. Isn't it a disaster if you're pretending to be a person you're not, and it's not what they were looking for anyway?
And I think that's really, really good advice, because I think it's something we often say to even our first years who are applying for, vacation schemes, and second years, third years. I think often they can feel quite dejected when, they've been rejected from a number of them, or not kind of got a number of them. And I think sometimes when you look into it, they're not that interested in what they're applying for, and they're doing it for the sake of it. And I think there's something about that authenticity, isn't there? And when you're going,
and if you can find something you're passionate about, it will stream out of you. And then you will come across so much better.
And I suppose it's what you say. I think if you go into something not as your true authentic self, and truthful to yourself, I think it perhaps then sets you up, if you do then go into that firm or profession, I guess sets you up on a back foot a little bit, if it then becomes harder for you to be your true self once you are there.
Absolutely. And where does that end? So in the first professional LGBT network I got involved in was property sector one. And there were a lot, even older than me, of LGBT people who had been hiding their whole professional lives and were sort of trapped. How do they now come out to people they've been working with sometimes for decades? And whilst for that generation there is there is a very good narrative about why they weren't out, but even so, it was really difficult. So be conscious about the situation and how you want your working life to be, because that's not just this week and next month.
It's for the rest of your career. And I suppose, in particularly at the bar, in areas of the law where you might come across the same people again and over time, and use those connections in different ways throughout your career. I suppose you just want to truly be able to be fully comfortable.
So hopefully by the time most of your students are applying to chambers, they will all have their FreeBar charter. This year, this is the commitment we're making. This is the progress we're making in this year. Here's our little logo.
I think that in itself,
look and see if it changes.
I was going to say, but that in itself, I think, shows the importance of FreeBar, and the work that it's doing in terms of ensuring these organizations commit to, and these kind of chambers commit to the work that they're doing. And like you say, making sure it's in action and not just in words. Kind of in what they're doing. And
of course, your students will have done the moot.
Well, yes. So that was, it's like you read my mind. It was actually what I was just about to ask you about. So can you tell us a little bit more about the Featherstone Moot then?
I can't take any credit for this. There's an amazing guy, Ollie Piercy, who is now a junior tenant at Garden Court. Had been working at the Public Law Project, did his pupillage there. He started it or in my head, he started it. He was one of the people who started it, and it's been amazing. So yeah, he asked me if I would judge. I've done some judging every year. It's grown and grown and grown. I think there were 60 teams last year.
Wow.
So it's always about proper moot competition, legal competition, and what that entails. Always about an LGBT plus subject, with judges being proper judges, and barristers and solicitors, ranging from fairly junior to very senior, many of whom are queer, all of whom, if they're not, are allies. So I think it works in terms of the student body. It's a mooting competition, which is great. Many of the students are straight, so they're actually got to focus on and thinking about an LGBT relevant legal topic and challenge something. And it's always a fairly, we've had cakes, we've had all sorts, fairly relevant and topical thing. So that's great, but also quite a lot of the students are queer, and they're seeing a proportion of different generations of legal professionals who are absolutely queer. My favourite, and I did meet him because he's now in pupillage, is the guy who actually did it in drag. That was fantastic. And I think it was about 2 years ago.
Wow.
But yeah, it's always great. There's always a brilliant party on the Saturday night. Happens across a Friday and Saturday usually.
Okay.
It's brilliant fun.
I mean, it sounds absolutely fantastic. And I suppose in thinking of it, to have an event or a moot like that so early in your, exposure to law and the law professions, what do you think that it kind of achieves, having an event like the Featherstone Moot for all those that take part, whether, like you say, they are queer, they are straight,
I think it gives a focus and it gives visibility, and it I hope, communicates to those students and beyond, if they're then talking about it with students who weren't involved, but their fellow students. It communicates that there is actually a good solid body of LGBT friendly people absolutely throughout and within the profession.
And I suppose, like what you said before, is it's an awareness, isn't it? An awareness. If you are at the start of your career in law and have that awareness, it can only be a positive for,
absolutely,
when you move forward and as you move forward. Okay, Brie, so just as we kind of bring things to a close and are coming to a close, is there anything that maybe I haven't asked you about, or anything important for you that you feel to say today that said?
I mean, I'm thinking about your students, so probably they want other bits of advice.
Yeah, certainly. Fire them our way.
Yourself. I think when you're thinking about the things you do along your journey that you might then be wanting to, if I say, leverage in support of applications, in support of making people think you're the best thing since sliced bread and they should be taking you on board. I'll say think creatively. So anyone can write a list of I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, and it speaks, it speaks for itself because it was in a legal context. But actually really looking and thinking about what you got out of something, what it demonstrates in terms of your skills, your understanding, all the things you need as a barrister or a lawyer. So what do you need? You need to have analytical skills. You need to have resilience. Oh my goodness, do you need resilience? You need to be self-motivated. You need to have some commercial awareness, because if you're a barrister in private practice, you're your own business. You're self-employed, you're driving yourself. So you need to have drive. You need to be hungry. You need to have very good communication skills, the ability to make someone feel confident that they and their case are safe in your hands very quickly. You need to be able to communicate very complicated concepts to people who've just never dealt with anything like that before and have no idea what you're talking about. And equally, at the same time, to be able to talk to fellow professionals on a level. So, I mean, there's a huge number of skills, and it's about looking at what you're offering and, you know, making the organizations you're applying to think not just you're really intelligent, but that you're the full package. You've got the range of skills and abilities that mean they can see in you the potential to actually be a very successful lawyer in your own right, building a practice, developing, you know, promoting yourself, attracting work, etc., etc. Is that any help?
I mean, a huge help. And actually, it was lovely to hear you say that, Brie, because I think some of the queries that I get most often are worries about careers and often about placements and when you should do placements. And if I don't do it in my first year, is it going to hinder me? And actually, I think the thing that I've most often said is ultimately, whether it is in the law profession or not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your experience is, as long as you are able to vocalize and communicate skills development, whether it is through a babysitting job, a job in McDonald's, volunteering at a job centre. It is just about the articulation of skills and linking it to the skills that are required from the employer, the workplace. And actually, it doesn't have to be. I think there's sometimes such a worry, especially somewhere like LSE, where there can be sort of a lot of drive in the students towards careers. There can then therefore be a lot of worry if you don't get a placement or you don't get this. But I think, like you said, it's about exploring a variety of opportunities, isn't it? And what you can get out of them.
And don't worry about applying and failing. It happens to us all. So I made loads of applications for, I mean, I know it was a totally different era, loads of applications for, I got pupillage. Then I didn't get taken on at the end of my first 12 months. I didn't get taken on at the end of my, thank goodness, because it was crime and I decided I didn't want to do it. My next 6 months. Then I went and did another one and I didn't get taken on there. But by then the first place were recruiting again and asked me if I wanted to go back. When I applied for Silk first time, I failed. I didn't get it. You know, you have to dare to try. And the fact you don't get it doesn't mean you're a failure. It means you didn't get it this time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like you say, I think just that resilience is so important, isn't it, in terms of career and career building in whatever you want to do, right? Well, Brie, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I've absolutely loved speaking with you and just finding out about you and your career, and
You're welcome.
Celebrating the role I think that you play, because like you say, I think it is, I guess as a final point, just so much about that visibility and confidence, and then empowering others to do the same kind of at the bar. So thank you so much for joining us this evening.
You're very welcome. I can't believe it's been an hour.